Andrew Williamson here. Welcome back to Williamson Education. In the last 3 lectures, we have been discussing different considerations for how to structure your sentences. We have dwelled on the differences between phrases and clauses, between dependent and independent clauses. Now that we have all of that infrastructure in place, it is time to progress to another important topic in syntax. That is the difference between simple, compound, and complex sentence structures. Everything that we have done on syntax, phrases, and clauses up to this point has been building up to learning about these 3 crucial syntaxes. Now, I've actually already introduced these 3 structures, simple, compound, and complex, without naming them as such. If you know about subject-verb constructions, subordinating conjunctions, and the coordinating conjunctions that we discussed in our very first lesson together, then you already know most of what you will need to understand these 3 sentence structures. We might begin, though, by taking a step back and asking, what's the point of having different sentence structures in English? Well, the thing is, English is a language that thrives on diversity, difference, and variety. The borders of the English language are relatively open. The language tends to absorb all sorts of different words and structures from different languages. There's no official language police in English, meaning that there's nobody saying that a particular word or phrase is not allowed to be called an English word. Perhaps as a result of this linguistic variety, English language speakers and writers place a great deal of emphasis on changing their sentence structures too. English language speakers and writers consider the constant repetition of the same words and the same structures to be boring. So we are always switching things up, always mixing it up. That's probably why we need at least 3 different sentence structures so that we can just keep stirring the pot. But enough with this theory now. Let's learn about these 3 different sentence structures. The first is the easiest, as its name would suggest, the simple sentence. Simple sentences are simple because they contain only one independent clause. Simple sentences may be short or long, but they share this basic quality, only one independent clause. Simple sentences do not have any dependent clauses. If you see a subordinating conjunction in a sentence, it is rather unlikely that it's a simple sentence. Before we go on too much further, though, let's hear some examples of simple sentences. Here's one example. I lifted my arm off the chair. See that? There's nothing to it. Single independent clause, simple sentence. You might be asking, if simple sentences are so simple, why would anyone want to use them? Don't simple sentences suggest simple ideas? Well, yes, in a way. There's a misconception out there in the world that you must use complex, complicated sentences to communicate complex, complicated ideas. This misconception often leads to difficult, incomprehensible writing and speaking. And this misconception is clearly wrong. As a matter of fact, the best writers that I know take complex, sophisticated ideas and break them down into simple components. The best writers that I know take what is complicated and make it simple. Often this process of simplification requires them to use, you guessed it, simple sentences. That said, there's a place in our world for more complicated sentence structures too. You just have to know how and when to use them. And that brings me to my next topic, the compound sentence. What is a compound sentence, you might be wondering? A compound sentence is a sentence that has not 1, but 2 independent clauses. These independent clauses are connected with a so-called coordinating conjunction. You might recognize coordinating conjunctions better by their unofficial name, fanboys conjunctions. As a reminder, the fanboys coordinating conjunctions are for, and, nor, but, or, yet, and so. These are the little words that allow us to connect ideas without indicating that one or the other idea is more important. Unlike subordinating conjunctions, which establish one clause as being syntactically superior to the other, coordinating conjunctions express relationships of equality between the clauses that they connect. Let's go ahead and look at some examples of compound sentences. Here's the first one that I'll give you. The teacher was hungry, so he took a bite to eat. In this sentence, we have not 1, but 2 independent clauses. The teacher was hungry, and he took a bite to eat. These independent clauses are connected using a comma and a fanboys conjunction. In this case, the conjunction so. We'll learn even more about conjunctions in a later lesson. But for now, it will be enough to know that every fanboys conjunction has its own logic to connect independent clauses. The coordinated conjunction so expresses a cause and effect relationship between clauses, and we can see that this sort of relationship is appropriate under the circumstances. Taking a bite to eat is clearly the logical effect of being hungry. We'll examine another compound sentence just to dig a little deeper into the topic. Here's the next example. The lady felt tired, but she had to continue her journey. Once again, as before, we have here two independent clauses connected by a fanboy's coordinating conjunction. The two independent clauses are the lady felt tired and she had to continue her journey. The coordinating conjunction is but, which typically indicates a contrast or opposition in the ideas of the sentence. And we can see the contrast quite clearly from the first half of the sentence to the second. The lady feels tired and would likely want to take a rest. However, for whatever reason, she needs to keep going on her trip. So, those are the first two types of sentences. What about the third, the complex sentence? In fact, we already studied the complex sentence at some length during our last lesson when we discussed how to structure sentences with dependent clauses. Quite simply, complex sentences are those that attach a dependent clause to an independent clause using a subordinating conjunction. In fact, as we know, every time you use a dependent clause in one of your sentences, you also need to use an independent clause. So using a dependent clause in a sentence is a good way to know that you will be writing a complex sentence. We've looked at examples of simple and compound sentences. Now let's look at a couple complex sentences. Here we go. Here's our first example. Although they were excited to visit Japan, they were also a bit nervous to take the long flight across the Pacific Ocean. As we can see, we have two clauses here. They were excited to visit Japan, and they were also a bit nervous to take the long flight across the Pacific Ocean. These two clauses are connected using a subordinating conjunction, although all of these factors mean that we are dealing with a complex sentence. We'll look at one more complex sentence to drive home the point. Here's the next example. The boy's parents were hesitant to let him go into the pool because he did not yet know how to swim. In this sentence, we still have two clauses, but I've rearranged the order of the dependent and the independent clauses. Now the independent clause comes first, and the dependent clause comes second. Still, though, we use a subordinating conjunction, in this case, because, to connect the ideas. Therefore, we have once again written a complex sentence. As I mentioned near the beginning of this class, there's a good reason for English to have so many different syntaxes. We simply get bored when the sentences we read use the same words over and over again, or use the same syntaxes repeatedly. In order to maintain the interest of your audience, it's best to vary your sentence structure very regularly. I'm not saying that every sentence needs to have a structure different from the one that comes before it, but I am saying that you should remain aware of which structures, simple, compound, and complex, you are using most frequently. If you find yourself using one or the other of these structures too often, focus on introducing different structures more often. You may even want to do a complete edit of your writing just with sentence structure in mind. With this lesson on simple, compound, and complex structures, we come to the end of our unit on syntax. We will return to contemplate some more advanced topics in syntax near the end of the series of lessons. For now, though, it is enough for you to understand these fundamental considerations in order for you to level up your spoken and written style in English. As you edit and audit your writing for sentence structure, just remember that variety is the name of the game. Always look for ways to change up the game in order to keep your audience's attention. Well, I will leave you with that as the final note of this set of lessons on syntax. I'll see you next time as we pick up with pronouns. Stay tuned, and in the meantime, spread the word.